To understand Fallout 3, you have to start with the world that existed before the bombs. It was a world that looked familiar on the surface, full of advertisements, suburban neighborhoods, and shiny promises of a bright tomorrow. But underneath it all, it was a society built on tension. The United States in the Fallout universe leaned hard into a kind of optimistic, retro-futuristic identity, where technology was everywhere and patriotism was treated like a product. People were told that progress was inevitable, that the future was secure, and that the American way of life would last forever. But that confidence hid a growing fear that the world was running out of what it needed most. The biggest pressure point was resources, especially oil. Over time, the world's supply began to collapse, and as it did, the global balance of power started to crack. Countries that relied on fuel to function began competing more aggressively, and eventually, the competition turned into open conflict. This period became known as the Resource Wars, and it reshaped the planet's politics and stability. The idea of nations cooperating to share what was left didn't last. Instead, countries began to treat survival as a contest, and the world started to feel like it was being pushed towards something irreversible. In the Fallout timeline, the United States responded to this crisis by becoming more militarized and more controlling. The government poured money into defense, expanded its influence, and leaned into a mindset where national security mattered more than personal freedom. The military became a constant presence, and technology was developed not just for convenience, but for dominance. In this atmosphere, corporations grew stronger too, and few corporations were more influential than Vault-Tec. Vault-Tec's public image was built around safety. Their vaults were marketed as secure underground shelters that would protect families from nuclear war. The advertisements were cheerful and comforting, full of smiling faces and friendly mascots. But behind the marketing was something colder. Many of the vaults were not simply shelters. They were controlled environments, designed for long-term experiments. Vault-Tec was working with the government to gather data on human behavior under extreme conditions. Some vaults were designed to succeed, but many were designed to test limits, stress, and survival. This matters for Fallout 3 because the story is shaped by one of the rare vaults that was meant to stay closed. Vault 101 was designed as a control vault, meant to remain sealed for generations. Its purpose was to study what happened to a society that never returned to the surface, one that lived permanently underground with strict leadership and limited outside influence. In theory, Vault 101 would be stable, safe, and orderly. In reality, it would become something else, a small world where power concentrated, where fear of the outside became a tool, and where control could be justified as protection. Before Vault 101 ever sealed, the world above it kept moving toward collapse. In 2077, the final days of pre-war America arrived. The government and military were preparing for the worst, but the public continued living in denial, distracted by products, entertainment, and the illusion that everything was under control. Then, on October 23, 2077, the Great War happened. The nuclear exchange was brief, lasting only a couple of hours, but it destroyed civilization as people knew it. Cities burned, infrastructure collapsed, and the surface became a place filled with radiation, ruin, and silence. Washington, D.C. was one of the places hit hard. As the capital, it was a major target. The surrounding region became what would later be called the Capital Wasteland, and it would remain one of the most devastated parts of the former United States. Unlike some regions that eventually rebuilt into stronger societies, the Capital Wasteland stayed harsh, broken, and unstable for a long time. The environment was damaged, The water was contaminated, and the ruins of the old world stood like skeletons across the landscape. In the years after the Great War, survivors crawled out of shelters, basements, and makeshift bunkers. Some formed small settlements, clinging to whatever scraps they could find. Others turned to raiding and violence, taking what they needed from anyone weaker than them. Mutated creatures appeared as the radiation reshaped life, and over time, something even stranger emerged: ghouls. Humans exposed to intense radiation sometimes survived, but their bodies changed, their skin decayed, and their voices grew rough. Some remained fully intelligent, living as they always had, just trapped in a ruined form. Others lost themselves completely, becoming feral ghouls, creatures driven only by instinct and hunger. Meanwhile, somewhere beneath the surface, Vault 101 sealed its doors. The people inside were told they were safe, that the outside world was dead, and that the vault was their entire future. Vault 101 became a controlled society under the authority of the Overseer, who held power over resources, rules, and information. The vault's residents lived in a structured routine, with education, work assignments, and strict laws. The outside was treated as a myth and a warning. Leaving was unthinkable. Even talking too much about it could be dangerous, but the story of Fallout 3 begins because of a rare exception. Vault 101 wasn't always completely isolated. At one point, someone was allowed in. A scientist named James arrived at Vault 101 with his infant child. The Overseer permitted their entry, and the reason mattered. James was educated, useful, and valuable. The Vault needed skilled people, and James had knowledge that could strengthen the community. So the Vault made room for him, and his child grew up as one of them, even though they weren't born in the Vault like everyone else. That child would become the lone wanderer, the protagonist of Fallout 3. Their life begins in a place that feels safe compared to the wasteland, but it's also a place where safety is built on control. From childhood, the lone wanderer is shaped by the Vault's rules, its narrow view of the world, and its strict social structure. Their earliest memories are of metal walls, fluorescent lights, and the feeling that the outside is nothing but death. As the lone wanderer grows, Vault 101's routine continues. People go to work, children go to school, and the Overseer maintains order. The Vault's residents build friendships, rivalries, and small traditions. There are birthdays, exams, arguments, and celebrations. It feels like a normal life, just underground, until it doesn't. Because even the most controlled environment can't stop curiosity, it can't stop questions, and it can't stop the weight of a secret. James, the lone wanderer's father, is not in Vault 101 by accident. He came with a purpose. He was part of something larger, something tied to the wasteland above, and he never truly stopped thinking about it. While the Vault wanted him to settle in and accept the underground life, James carried an idea that refused to die. An idea that the wasteland could be changed, that it could be healed in a way no one else had managed. That idea was Project Purity. Project Purity began before the events of Fallout 3 as a plan to restore clean water to the capital wasteland. The concept was simple in theory, but almost impossible in practice. The region's water sources were contaminated by radiation and pollutants. Clean water was rare and valuable. Settlements survived on small supplies, scavenged bottles, and questionable filtration. But if a large-scale purifier could be activated, it could provide clean water to everyone. It could become the foundation for real rebuilding. It could give the capital wasteland something it had never truly had: hope that wasn't just a rumor. James had worked on Project Purity with other scientists, including a woman named Catherine. the lone wanderer's mother. Catherine believed in the project too. She believed that clean water could change everything. But the wasteland is unforgiving, and the work was dangerous. Catherine died during childbirth, leaving James alone with his child and his grief. The project became too painful to continue, so James did something that would shape everything that came after. He ran. He took his infant child and disappeared into Vault 101, choosing isolation over the wasteland, safety over the dream. He buried the project, buried his past, and tried to build a new life where his child could grow up without the constant threat of raiders, radiation, and death. For a while, it worked. The lone wanderer grew into a teenager inside the vault, surrounded by familiar faces. They learned to read, to fight in training simulations, to follow rules. They took their GOAT exam, the test that determined what job they would have as an adult. The vault prepared them for a future that was predictable, structured, and contained. But Vault 101's greatest rule was also its greatest weakness. The vault could not stay closed forever in the minds of the people living inside it. And James, no matter how long he tried to hide from the wasteland, could not forget what he started. Eventually, something pushed him back toward the surface. The exact moment of decision is quiet, but the impact is enormous. James leaves Vault 101 inches secret, slipping out into the wasteland alone. And the moment the Overseer realizes what has happened, the vault's fragile stability begins to crack. Because if one person can leave, then the outside isn't just a myth anymore. It's real, and that means the Overseer's control is threatened. This is the moment when Fallout 3 truly begins. The lone wanderer wakes up to a vault that feels different. The halls are tense, people whisper, security is aggressive, and suddenly the vault that once felt like a home begins to feel like a trap. The Overseer decides that the lone wanderer is a problem because they are connected to James and because their existence represents the same dangerous idea that the vault is not the only world left. And so, the lone wanderer is forced to do the one thing Vault 101 was designed to prevent. They leave. They step out of the vault into the bright, ruined wasteland. And the timeline of Fallout 3 begins to unfold, one slow step at a time, across the broken bones of Washington, D.C. The first moments outside Vault 101 feel almost unreal because the lone wanderer has spent their entire life under fluorescent lights and metal ceilings. When the vault door opens, the world isn't just bigger, it's blinding. The sunlight is harsh, the air looks dusty, and the land stretches out in every direction like an ocean of ruined earth. For a second, it can feel quiet, almost peaceful, but the quiet doesn't last long. The Capital Wasteland is not an empty place. It's full of movement, hidden threats, and the constant feeling that something is watching from behind broken walls. Vault 101 itself is built into a rocky hillside, and once the lone wanderer steps away from the entrance, the world immediately shows its scars. There are dead trees, cracked roads, and distant silhouettes of ruined structures. The land feels like it has been stripped down to the basics of survival. There are no clean signs, no friendly lights, no comforting routines. Everything looks like it's been left behind, half buried in dust. Even the wind feels different, like it's carrying the weight of 2 centuries of decay. Not far from the vault, the lone wanderer can begin encountering the first signs of life. Small creatures scuttle through the dirt. Insects that shouldn't be so large crawl through weeds. Mutated animals roam the hills. The wasteland teaches its first lesson quickly. Even the smallest enemy can be dangerous if you aren't prepared. It's not about heroic battles, it's about staying alive. It's about learning when to fight, when to run, and when to stay quiet. One of the first human threats the lone wanderer may meet is raiders. Raiders are scattered across the capital wasteland, and they represent one of the most immediate dangers because they are unpredictable and violent. They don't live by laws, and they don't care about negotiation. Many of them are armed with scavenged weapons, wearing patched-together armor, and surviving by taking from others. They aren't an organized army, they're a symptom of a world where survival has replaced morality. As the lone wanderer moves farther from Vault 101, they eventually find one of the most important early locations in Fallout 3, Megaton. Megaton is a settlement built from scrap metal, constructed around the crater of an unexploded nuclear bomb. The bomb sits in the center of town like a reminder of how fragile life is in this world. The settlement's walls are made from rusted airplane parts, old steel sheets, and whatever else people could salvage. Megaton looks rough, but it's alive. It has guards, vendors, and citizens who have built routines in a place that should not be able to support them. Megaton's existence shows that people in the wasteland can still build something stable, even if it's ugly and dangerous. The town has a water supply, homes, and a basic economy. It also has politics, arguments, and secrets. The lone wanderer is immediately treated as an outsider, but not necessarily as an enemy. In Megaton, people have learned that strangers can be dangerous, but they can also be useful. Inside Megaton, one of the first major figures the lone wanderer meets is Lucas Sims, the town's sheriff. Sims is a calm and responsible leader, and he represents a kind of old-fashioned order. He believes in keeping the peace, protecting the town, and maintaining some form of law. His presence gives Megaton structure, and his willingness to talk to the lone wanderer makes him one of the first examples of trust offered in the wasteland. Megaton is also where the lone wanderer can learn about the bomb at the center of town. Some residents treat it like a holy object, while others treat it like a threat they've learned to ignore. The Children of Adam are a religious group that worships radiation and the bomb itself, seeing it as a symbol of divine power. Their presence adds an unsettling layer to Megaton because it shows how the apocalypse has shaped belief systems. When the old world died, some people tried to rebuild society, and others tried to find meaning in the destruction. Megaton also introduces one of Fallout 3's most famous early moral choices. A wealthy man named Alistair Tenpenny, living in Tenpenny Tower, wants the bomb destroyed, not because he fears it, but because he dislikes the sight of Megaton. He sees the town as an eyesore, a stain on the wasteland. His offer is simple and cruel. He will pay the lone wanderer to detonate the bomb and wipe the town off the map. This choice is one of the clearest examples of Fallout's moral extremes, because it asks the player to decide whether money and comfort are worth innocent lives. Tenpenny Tower itself is another symbol of Fallout's world. It's a pre-war luxury building that still stands tall, and it has become home to rich survivors who cling to the idea of civilization through comfort and isolation. Tenpenny Tower residents see themselves as better than wastelanders. They have security, clean rooms, and expensive tastes. But the tower's existence also shows that wealth did not disappear with the old world. It simply changed shape, turning into something smaller, more protected, and more selfish. Whether the lone wanderer chooses to help Megaton or destroy it, the main story continues pulling them forward with one clear goal: find James. The lone wanderer doesn't know what James is doing or why he left, but they know he went into the wasteland. That knowledge becomes the driving force behind the early game. Every new location becomes a clue. Every conversation becomes a chance to find a trail. From Megaton, the lone wanderer is directed toward Galaxy News Radio, a station that broadcasts across the wasteland. The voice of Galaxy News Radio is Three Dog, a charismatic DJ who speaks like a storyteller and a rebel. His radio station isn't just entertainment, it's information, it's morale. In a world where people feel isolated and hopeless, hearing a human voice on the airwaves matters. It makes the wasteland feel connected. Reaching Galaxy News Radio is not easy because the station is located in the ruins of Washington, D.C., and the city is one of the most dangerous areas in the game. The downtown ruins are filled with super mutants, hostile creatures, and tight corridors that can trap travelers. The lone wanderer learns quickly that the city is not open and friendly. It's a maze of collapsed buildings, broken streets, and underground tunnels. Super mutants are one of the most terrifying enemies the lone wanderer encounters early on. They are massive, violent, and heavily armed. In Fallout 3, super mutants are often seen carrying assault rifles, hunting in groups, and attacking settlements. They are not subtle enemies. They are loud, aggressive, and dangerous. Their presence in the city makes the ruins feel like occupied territory, and it forces the lone wanderer to move carefully, using cover and planning instead of rushing forward. The city's layout also introduces the player to Fallout 3's metro tunnels. Because many streets are blocked by debris and collapsed structures, the lone wanderer often has to travel through underground subway systems to move between districts. These tunnels are dark, claustrophobic, and filled with threats like feral ghouls and raiders. Traveling through the metro reinforces the feeling that the capital wasteland is layered with danger above ground and danger below. When the lone wanderer finally reaches Galaxy News Radio, they find that the station is under threat. Three Dogs broadcasting depends on a relay dish located at the Washington Monument, and super mutants have been interfering with it. Three Dog agrees to help the lone wanderer find James, but he asks for help in return. This creates one of Fallout 3's key early story beats. The lone wanderer must earn information by surviving the wasteland and proving their usefulness. Helping Three Dog leads to a mission at the Museum of Technology, where the lone wanderer searches for a dish component needed to restore the radio signal. The museum is filled with old-world exhibits and broken technology, and it is guarded by super mutants. The mission reinforces Fallout's theme of scavenging the past to survive the present. The lone wanderer is literally walking through the ruins of human progress, taking pieces of old technology to keep a new world connected. Once the relay is repaired, Three Dog keeps his promise and gives the lone wanderer information about James. He reveals that James was seen heading toward Rivet City. Rivet City is one of the most important settlements in Fallout 3, and it represents a different kind of survival compared to Megaton. Instead of being built from scrap around a bomb crater, Rivet City is built inside the remains of an aircraft carrier. It is a floating city, protected by metal walls and surrounded by water. Rivet City feels more structured than most wasteland settlements. It has security, doctors, scientists, and a more formal government. The city is divided into sections, with living areas, markets, and research spaces. It feels closer to a functioning society, and it becomes a key location for the story because of its connection to science and Project Purity. When the lone wanderer arrives at Rivet City, they find that James has indeed been there. His presence is felt through conversations, records, and the way people react to the mention of his name. James is known as a scientist, someone who was asking questions about clean water and large-scale projects. This reinforces that he didn't leave Vault 101 randomly. He left because he returned to his mission, the mission he abandoned years ago. Rivet City also introduces Dr. Madison Lee, a scientist who worked with James on Project Purity before he disappeared into Vault 101. Madison Lee is cautious and skeptical, but she becomes an important ally. Through her, the lone wanderer learns more about Project Purity and why it matters. The project is centered at the Jefferson Memorial, a massive pre-war monument that has become a symbol of lost America. Beneath the memorial is the purifier system, a machine designed to cleanse water on a large scale. The Jefferson Memorial is one of Fallout 3's most powerful story locations because it ties together history and hope. It was once a place of national pride, built to honor Thomas Jefferson, and now it stands as a ruin, surrounded by polluted water and danger. But inside that ruin is the possibility of something new. Project Purity is the idea that the wasteland doesn't have to remain poisoned forever, that clean water can become the foundation for rebuilding. As Part 2 comes to a close, the lone wanderer's journey has shifted. It began as a desperate search for a father who vanished into the wasteland. But now, the search has revealed something larger. James didn't just leave. He returned to a dream that could change the entire capital wasteland. And the lone wanderer is no longer just chasing him. They're being pulled into the same mission, step by step, toward the Jefferson Memorial and the heart of Project Purity. By the time the lone wanderer reaches Rivet City, the capital wasteland has already taught them what survival looks like in its purest form. It's scavenging for food and clean water. It's moving through ruins with your weapon raised. It's learning to recognize danger before it reaches you. But Rivet City adds a different feeling to the journey because it isn't just a camp of desperate survivors. It's a functioning community with rules, structure, and a sense that people are trying to rebuild something lasting, even if the world around them still looks broken. The aircraft carrier that holds Rivet City is enormous, and the fact that it still floats makes it feel almost impossible. Its metal hull is rusted and scarred, but it remains one of the most stable locations in the region. Inside, the city is divided into sections that resemble a real town more than a wasteland settlement. There are living quarters, a marketplace, medical facilities, and research areas. People here aren't simply surviving day to day. They're working jobs, forming relationships, and trying to create a society that has rules instead of chaos. Rivet City's security is strong compared to most settlements, and that strength is necessary because the capital wasteland is filled with threats that don't care about walls. Raiders roam the land looking for easy targets. Super mutants hunt in groups, and the ruins of Washington, D.C. hide dangers that can spill out at any time. Rivet City stays alive because it has guards, discipline, and the advantage of being surrounded by water. That water may be irradiated, but it still creates a barrier that makes the city harder to attack. Within Rivet City, the lone wanderer's search for James begins to feel more focused. The city has records, people who remember him, and scientists who knew him personally. Instead of rumors and vague sightings, the lone wanderer finally finds something solid. James was here. He spoke to people. He asked questions. He followed the same path he had walked years ago, back when Project Purity was still alive. Dr. Madison Lee becomes the most important person in this stage of the timeline. She is a scientist with strong principles, but also a practical awareness of the wasteland's danger. She doesn't trust easily, and she doesn't believe in fantasies. When the lone wanderer tells her they are searching for James, she doesn't respond with excitement. She responds with caution because she understands what James was involved in, and she knows the project he wanted to revive could draw the attention of powerful enemies. Madison Lee's connection to James is not just professional, it's personal. She worked with him on Project Purity at the Jefferson Memorial. She believed in the dream of clean water, and she watched that dream collapse when tragedy struck. When James disappeared, it wasn't just a coworker leaving, it was a symbol of hope vanishing into the wasteland. Hearing that he has returned is shocking, but it also reopens old wounds. Project Purity itself is one of the most important pieces of Fallout 3's timeline because it represents the rare idea that the wasteland can be improved on a massive scale. Most people in the capital wasteland have adapted to hardship. They accept that the water is dirty, that radiation is everywhere, and that survival is temporary. Project Purity challenges that mindset. It says the wasteland doesn't have to remain poisoned. It says clean water can become normal again, and that kind of change is powerful enough to reshape the entire region. The Jefferson Memorial is where Project Purity is based. It is a huge, recognizable pre-war structure that survived the bombs, though not without damage. The memorial sits near the Potomac, surrounded by ruined streets and broken buildings. It feels like an artifact from another world, a monument built for pride and history, now sitting in a land where pride has been replaced by hunger. But inside the memorial, beneath its cracked stone and shattered halls, is the purifier system James wants to activate. When the lone wanderer agrees to help Madison Lee, the journey shifts from investigation to action. It becomes about moving toward the memorial and confronting whatever stands in the way. Madison Lee eventually agrees to return to Project Purity, and she travels with a group of scientists. This moment matters because it shows the project is not just James alone, it is a team effort. It requires knowledge, equipment, and people willing to risk their lives for something that might not even work. As the lone wanderer escorts Madison Lee and the scientists toward the Jefferson Memorial, the trip feels like a moving caravan of hope, fragile and exposed. The wasteland is dangerous enough for one person, but moving a group through it is even harder. Every step carries the possibility of attack. Every ruined building could hide raiders. Every stretch of road could lead into a super mutant ambush. The scientists are not soldiers. They are vulnerable, and they depend on the lone wanderer to protect them. When the group finally reaches the Jefferson Memorial, the sense of history becomes heavy. The memorial's interior is ruined, but the scale of the building still carries the feeling of the old world. Marble floors, large halls, and faded symbols of America remain. It's a reminder that before the war, people believed in permanence. They built monuments to last forever. But the wasteland proves that nothing is truly permanent except the consequences of choices made under pressure. Inside the memorial, the lone wanderer finally reunites with James. The reunion is not treated as a simple emotional moment. It is layered with urgency and responsibility. James is relieved to see his child alive, but he is also focused. He is in the middle of restarting Project Purity, and he knows that time matters. The purifier system is close to functioning, but it needs a key component, and the project is vulnerable. James explains more about Project Purity and what it could mean. Clean water could change settlement life completely. It could reduce disease, improve survival, and create stability. It could even allow communities to grow beyond small, desperate camps. The purifier could become the foundation for a real civilization, something that doesn't rely entirely on scavenging. James believes that if the purifier works, it will give the capital wasteland a future that isn't built only on fear. But the moment of reunion doesn't last long, because Project Purity attracts attention. The Enclave, one of Fallout 3's most important factions, arrives at the Jefferson Memorial. The Enclave represents the remnants of the pre-war United States government and military power. They have advanced weapons, strong armor, and a sense of authority that makes them feel almost alien compared to the wasteland's scavenger factions. They believe they are the rightful inheritors of America, and they see the wasteland as something that must be controlled. The Enclave's arrival changes the entire situation. They are not here to negotiate fairly. They are here to take Project Purity because they understand its value. Whoever controls clean water can control the wasteland. It's not just about charity or rebuilding. It's about power. The Enclave knows that if they own the purifier, they can shape the Commonwealth of Survivors into something dependent on them. Colonel Augustus Autumn becomes the key Enclave figure at the memorial. He is disciplined, calm, and determined. He confronts James and demands control of the purifier. Autumn's approach is not like a raider's violence. It is structured authority, backed by soldiers who follow orders without hesitation. The Enclave soldiers in their power armor represent the kind of military strength the wasteland rarely sees. Their presence makes the memorial feel like it has been invaded by the old world's ghost. James refuses to surrender Project Purity. His refusal is not reckless. It is a final decision shaped by years of grief, hope, and responsibility. He knows that if the Enclave takes the purifier, it will no longer be a gift to the wasteland. It will become a weapon. It will become leverage. James believes the purifier must belong to everyone, not to a faction that will use it to dominate. In one of the most defining moments of Fallout 3's story, James sacrifices himself to prevent the Enclave from taking control. He triggers a system that floods the purifier chamber with radiation, killing himself and stopping the Enclave from immediately seizing the project. This moment is tragic, but it also becomes a turning point for the Lone Wanderer. The personal mission to find their father ends in loss, but it also becomes something else. It becomes a responsibility to finish what James started. The Lone Wanderer escapes the memorial with Madison Lee and the surviving scientists, but the escape is not peaceful. The memorial becomes a battlefield, and the Lone Wanderer is forced to flee while the Enclave establishes control over the area. This is the moment when the story fully shifts from searching to resisting. The Enclave is now an active threat, and Project Purity is now the central prize in the war for the Capital Wasteland's future. After the escape, the Lone Wanderer is left with grief, confusion, and a new purpose. James is gone, but his dream remains. Project Purity is still there, incomplete but possible. The Enclave has shown itself, and it has made clear that it will not allow the purifier to become a free gift to the wasteland. And now, the Lone Wanderer must decide what it means to carry the weight of their father's final choice. The timeline of Fallout 3 continues from this point with a new urgency. The Lone Wanderer is no longer just a child from Vault 101 trying to survive outside. They are now someone tied directly to the most important project in the region, and the factions of the wasteland will begin moving around them like pieces on a board. The Jefferson Memorial has become the center of conflict, and the Lone Wanderer's next steps will decide whether clean water becomes the beginning of a new world or the tool of an old one that refuses to die. After the escape from the Jefferson Memorial, the Capital Wasteland feels colder than before, not because the air changes or because the ruins suddenly look worse, but because the Lone Wanderer now understands something that can't be unseen. The wasteland isn't only dangerous because of raiders and mutants. It's dangerous because there are organized powers still fighting over it, powers with resources, technology, and the ability to reshape everything. The Enclave's arrival at Project Purity proves that the old world never fully died. Pieces of it survived, and some of those pieces still believe they own what's left. In the aftermath of James's sacrifice, Madison Lee and the remaining scientists retreat to Rivet City, shaken but alive. The purifier is still incomplete, and the Enclave has taken control of the Jefferson Memorial, turning it into a guarded stronghold. The dream of clean water hasn't vanished, but it has become trapped behind enemy lines. The lone wanderer is left with grief and a sense of unfinished purpose, because James didn't die just to delay the Enclave. He died to keep the Purifier from becoming a weapon. Now the lone wanderer is the one who has to make sure that sacrifice meant something. Back in Rivet City, the mood around Project Purity changes. It is no longer just a scientific mission, it becomes a war problem. The scientists are not soldiers, and they cannot fight the Enclave directly. They need protection, allies, and a way to push back against an enemy that is far more organized than anything the Capital Wasteland usually throws at people. The question becomes simple but heavy. Who can stand against the Enclave? That answer leads directly to the Brotherhood of Steel. The Brotherhood in Fallout 3 is stationed at the Citadel, a massive fortified structure built from the ruins of the Pentagon. The Citadel is one of the strongest military positions in the Capital Wasteland, and it represents a faction that has both discipline and advanced technology. The Brotherhood's ideology is centered on controlling dangerous technology so it cannot be misused. They see themselves as protectors of humanity's future, but they also have strict rules and a long history of refusing to help outsiders unless it aligns with their goals. In Fallout 3, the Brotherhood's presence feels different from the Enclave's. The Enclave presents itself as authority and ownership, as if the wasteland is a territory to be ruled. The Brotherhood presents itself as guardianship, as if technology must be contained and controlled for the good of everyone. Both factions are powerful, both are armed, but the way they justify themselves is different, and that difference shapes how the lone wanderer experiences them. When the lone wanderer approaches the Brotherhood for help, they meet Elder Lyons, the leader of the Brotherhood chapter in the Capital Wasteland. Lyons is unusual compared to traditional Brotherhood leaders because he has chosen to focus on protecting people rather than only collecting technology. His chapter actively fights super mutants to defend settlements, and this choice has created tension within the Brotherhood. Some members believe Lyons has strayed too far from the Brotherhood's original mission. This internal division becomes important because it shows the Brotherhood is not a perfect solution. They are powerful, but they are also struggling with their identity. The lone wanderer is stepping into a faction that is already under pressure, already stretched thin, and already questioning its future. Still, Lyons understands the importance of Project Purity. He recognizes that clean water could stabilize the region in a way that military victories never could. The Brotherhood also has another advantage: Liberty Prime. Liberty Prime is one of the most iconic pieces of technology in Fallout 3. It is a massive pre-war robot designed as a propaganda weapon and a battlefield machine. Liberty Prime is built like a towering giant, covered in heavy armor and armed with devastating weapons. It was created during the pre-war period as a symbol of American power, built to fight communism in the Fallout universe's Cold War mindset. In Fallout 3, Liberty Prime becomes a literal weapon of hope and destruction because it represents the kind of force needed to break through Enclave defenses. However, Liberty Prime is not operational when the lone wanderer first learns about it. The Brotherhood has been trying to repair and activate it, but it requires an energy source powerful enough to run it. This is where the main story shifts into a new mission: securing a JEC. The JEC, or Garden of Eden Creation Kit, is one of Fallout's most important pieces of technology. It was designed as a terraforming tool meant to help rebuild civilization after nuclear war by restoring land, purifying water, and creating sustainable environments. In the lore, the GEC is often described as a miracle device, a piece of advanced technology that could transform wasteland into fertile ground. For Project Purity, the Gek is the missing key. Without it, the purifier cannot be fully activated and stabilized. The Lone Wanderer is sent to find a Gek in Vault 87, a location that immediately feels like a nightmare. Vault 87 is infamous because it is the source of many of the Capital Wasteland's super mutants. Unlike Vault 101, which remained relatively stable, Vault 87 was a place of horror. It was designed as an experimental vault where the Forced Evolutionary Virus, or FEV, was used on human subjects. FEV is the same virus connected to supermutants across the Fallout series, and Vault 87's experiments produced the supermutants that now roam the region. Entering Vault 87 is not like entering a normal ruin. It is like walking into the birthplace of a plague. The air feels heavy, the halls feel corrupted, and the enemies inside are not raiders or scavengers. They are super mutants, organized in their own brutal way, defending the place that created them. The Lone Wanderer fights through the vault's corridors, discovering evidence of the experiments and the suffering that happened there. This is Fallout at its most disturbing because it shows that the vaults were never just shelters, they were laboratories. As the Lone Wanderer searches Vault 87, the Gek is eventually found, but the mission doesn't end with success. The Enclave arrives. In a sudden shift, the Lone Wanderer is captured and taken away. This moment is important because it proves the Enclave has been watching. They didn't simply take Project Purity and wait. They tracked the Lone Wanderer, followed the trail, and moved in at the moment of vulnerability. The wasteland can be survived through strength, but organized factions can still overpower even the most determined individual. The Lone Wanderer wakes up in Raven Rock, the Enclave's main base. Raven Rock is a pre-war government facility hidden in the wasteland, turned into a heavily fortified headquarters. The atmosphere is controlled and sterile compared to the ruins outside. The walls are clean, the lighting is bright, and Enclave soldiers move with military precision. Raven Rock feels like a fragment of the old world preserved underground, but it also feels like a machine that never stopped running. Raven Rock is where the Lone Wanderer meets one of Fallout 3's most unusual antagonists, President John Henry Eden. Eden presents himself as the President of the United States, speaking through loudspeakers and broadcasts with a calm, confident voice. He uses patriotic language, promising restoration, order, and purity. His speeches are designed to sound comforting, like the old world can be rebuilt if people simply follow the right leader. But Eden is not what he claims to be. The truth is that Eden is an artificial intelligence. He is not a human president sitting behind a desk. He is a computer system controlling Raven Rock, using the idea of the presidency as a symbol of authority. This revelation is one of Fallout 3's most important moments because it shows how the old world's identity can be worn like a mask. The Enclave claims to be America, but its leader is a machine, and its vision of purity is not about rebuilding for everyone. It is about control. Eden's ideology is extreme. He believes the wasteland is contaminated and that the only way to restore the world is to cleanse it. His idea of cleansing is not metaphorical. He wants to use Project Purity as a delivery system for a modified FEV strain that would kill mutated life forms. This includes super mutants and other creatures. But it also includes many humans who have been changed by radiation exposure. Eden's plan would not just remove threats, it would wipe out huge portions of the wasteland's population. This is one of the darkest truths in Fallout 3's timeline. The Purifier is not just a machine that makes clean water. It is a machine that can distribute something to everyone. Water is life, and whoever controls it controls the future. Eden understands that. He wants to turn the purifier into a weapon disguised as salvation. Eden attempts to recruit the lone wanderer. He speaks to them privately, presenting his plan as necessary and justified. He offers them a vial containing the modified FEV, asking them to introduce it into the purifier system. This moment becomes one of Fallout 3's biggest moral decisions. The lone wanderer is being asked to decide whether the wasteland should be saved as it is messy, mutated, and alive, or whether it should be cleansed through mass death in the name of purity. Even more unsettling is the way Eden speaks about it. He doesn't sound like a villain screaming threats. He sounds like a calm leader making a reasonable argument. That calmness makes the plan feel even colder. It is not rage. It is calculation. It is the kind of cruelty that can hide behind polite words and patriotic music. As the lone wanderer moves through Raven Rock, they see more of the Enclave's structure. Enclave soldiers wear advanced power armor and carry high-grade weapons. Enclave scientists work in labs. Robots patrol corridors. Everything feels organized. Compared to the wasteland outside, Raven Rock feels like a functioning government bunker. But the purpose of that organization becomes clearer. The Enclave does not exist to help the wasteland. It exists to reclaim it under their terms. Eventually, the lone wanderer escapes Raven Rock. The escape is chaotic because the facility becomes unstable and fighting breaks out. The details of how it happens depend on choices, but the outcome is the same. The lone wanderer returns to the surface with the Gek, carrying the weight of Eden's offer and the knowledge of what the Enclave truly wants. The timeline now reaches a point where everything converges. The Gek is in the lone wanderer's hands. The Brotherhood has the chance to activate Liberty Prime. Project Purity can be completed, but the Enclave is not just guarding the Jefferson Memorial. They are preparing to reshape the entire wasteland through the Purifier. The lone wanderer has moved from being a child searching for their father to being the one person standing between the capital wasteland's future and a plan that would erase it. And as the next chapter begins, the wasteland's final battle for clean water is no longer just about science. It is about who gets to decide what humanity becomes after the end. After Raven Rock, the capital wasteland feels like it has entered its final phase of conflict, where the quiet, wandering, and scattered survival of earlier days is replaced by something larger and louder. The lone wanderer returns from the Enclave's headquarters, not only with the Gek, but with knowledge that changes everything. The Enclave is not just another faction trying to survive. It is a force trying to rewrite the wasteland into something that fits its own vision. And now, the lone wanderer carries the last piece needed to finish Project Purity, the very thing that could either become a gift to everyone or a weapon used to control the entire region. The Brotherhood of Steel understands what the Gek means the moment it is delivered. It isn't just a rare piece of technology, it is the missing key that turns the Purifier from a broken dream into a working reality. Elder Lyons knows that the Enclave cannot be allowed to keep the Jefferson Memorial. If the Enclave holds Project Purity, they hold the future, they hold the water, and in a wasteland where clean water is the difference between sickness and survival, that kind of control is more powerful than any gun. With the Gek secured, the Brotherhood's final plan becomes possible. Liberty Prime, the massive pre-war combat robot, can finally be activated. The Brotherhood has been rebuilding and repairing Liberty Prime for a long time, and its presence in the Citadel feels like a sleeping giant waiting for a signal. The robot was originally designed as a symbol of American military dominance, a walking propaganda machine built to crush enemies and deliver patriotic messages while doing it. In the Fallout universe, It represents a strange mixture of technology and ideology, where even a machine is programmed to speak in the language of war and certainty. When Liberty Prime powers on, the moment feels like history itself waking up. Its size is overwhelming, and the sound of its movement carries across the ruins like thunder. It is not subtle technology, it is a statement. The Brotherhood is no longer fighting the Enclave with small squads and desperate raids. They are bringing a weapon of the old world into the streets of the new one. Liberty Prime becomes the spearhead of the Brotherhood's assault on the Jefferson Memorial, and the Lone Wanderer becomes part of that final push. The march toward the memorial is one of Fallout 3's most defining sequences because it shows the scale of the conflict in a way the game rarely does. The streets of Washington, D.C. become a battlefield. Enclave soldiers appear in large numbers, armed with plasma weapons and protected by power armor. Vertibirds fly overhead, explosions echo between ruined buildings, and through it all, Liberty Prime walks forward like an unstoppable force, firing devastating attacks and broadcasting its programmed declarations about freedom and victory. Liberty Prime's role in this battle is not just physical, it is symbolic. It represents the Brotherhood's belief that technology can be used as a tool to protect humanity, even if that tool is terrifying. It also represents the lingering influence of the pre-war world. The robot was built for a war that no longer exists, against enemies that have turned to dust, but it still marches through the ruins as if the world never truly changed. It is the past refusing to stay buried, brought back to decide the future. As the Brotherhood pushes through Enclave defenses, the Lone Wanderer moves closer to the Jefferson Memorial once again. The memorial is no longer a place of quiet hope. It is a fortified Enclave position, guarded by soldiers who see themselves as the rightful rulers of the wasteland. The Purifier Chamber that once held James and his team is now the center of a war. The Enclave knows what the Purifier means, and they are willing to kill anyone who tries to take it. Inside the memorial, the fighting becomes intense and close. Corridors that once felt like ruins become contested ground. Enclave soldiers defend rooms, set up positions, and fight with the confidence of trained military forces. The Lone Wanderer's role is not simply to shoot enemies, it is to reach the Purifier system and activate it. The GECK must be installed, and the Purifier must be stabilized. Without that final step, everything James sacrificed for remains unfinished. When the Lone Wanderer finally reaches the Purifier control chamber, the timeline returns to the quiet seriousness of Project Purity itself. This is no longer about firefights and explosions. It is about turning on a machine that can change the region's future. Madison Lee and the remaining scientists are involved in the process, guiding the activation and making sure the system functions correctly. The Purifier is massive, complex, and fragile. It is a machine built for a world that collapsed before it could ever be used, and now it is being revived in a wasteland that desperately needs it. Project Purity's activation is one of Fallout 3's most important moments because it represents a rare victory that isn't based on destruction. In Fallout, many victories come from killing enemies, wiping out threats, or surviving battles. But Project Purity is different. It is an attempt to create something positive, something that can spread outward and improve life for everyone. It is the idea that the wasteland can be healed, not just endured. At the same time, the Purifier's activation is surrounded by moral tension. President Eden's offer still exists in the Lone Wanderer's mind. The modified FEV vial represents a darker path, where the Purifier becomes a delivery system for death rather than life. The choice of whether to introduce the FEV or not becomes a defining moment. It is a decision about what kind of future the lone wanderer believes the wasteland deserves. A future of imperfect survival, where mutated life still exists and people continue struggling, or a future shaped by forced purity, where countless lives are erased for the sake of an idea. If the lone wanderer refuses Eden's plan, the purifier becomes what James intended it to be, a source of clean water. If the lone wanderer accepts Eden's plan, the purifier becomes something else entirely, a weapon that kills mutated life through the very resource people depend on. This decision ties directly into Fallout's core theme, where technology itself is not good or evil, but the way it is used determines what it becomes. The final moments inside the purifier chamber also carry personal weight because James's sacrifice echoes through everything. The lone wanderer is standing in the same place where their father died, surrounded by the same machinery, finishing the same dream. The purifier is not just a scientific project anymore, it is a legacy. It is the final proof that James's hope was not meaningless. After the purifier is activated, the outcome spreads outward into the wasteland. Clean water begins to flow, and the capital wasteland's future shifts. The change is not immediate in every corner, because the wasteland is still dangerous, still filled with enemies and ruins. But the existence of clean water is a foundation. Settlements can survive more reliably. People can travel without being forced to drink contaminated water. Disease becomes less common. Life becomes slightly less brutal. In the aftermath, the Brotherhood of Steel becomes strongly tied to Project Purity. Elder Lyons' chapter positions itself as a protector of the purifier and the clean water supply. This increases the Brotherhood's influence in the region, and it reinforces Lyons' belief that the Brotherhood's purpose should be to protect people, not just collect technology. Project Purity becomes a symbol of what the Brotherhood can accomplish when it chooses to defend the wasteland instead of isolating itself from it. The Enclave, however, does not simply vanish. Even after losing Raven Rock and being pushed back at the Jefferson Memorial, Enclave forces remain active in the capital wasteland. They continue fighting, launching attacks, and trying to regain control. The Enclave's presence becomes one of the major threats in the wasteland's post-purity timeline, because even in defeat, they remain organized and dangerous. They are a faction that refuses to accept that the wasteland belongs to anyone else. This ongoing conflict becomes part of Fallout 3's wider world, where the player can continue exploring, completing quests, and shaping the region in smaller ways. The main story may reach its conclusion, but the wasteland continues. Raiders still roam, super mutants still hunt, ghouls still wander the ruins, and the lone wanderer's life continues, shaped by the choices they made in the purifier chamber. Project Purity becomes a kind of quiet miracle in Fallout 3's timeline. It is not a perfect solution. It does not rebuild cities overnight. It does not erase the horrors of the past. But it provides something the capital wasteland has lacked for centuries, a stable resource that can support real growth. In a world where people have lived under the assumption that the apocalypse is permanent, clean water becomes proof that the future can still be changed. And so, the timeline of Fallout 3 settles into its lasting shape. The lone wanderer began as a child of Vault 101, forced into the wasteland by circumstances they didn't choose. They wandered through ruins looking for their father, learning survival through danger and loss. They discovered the truth about Project Purity, fought against the Enclave, and carried the final responsibility that James could not. By the end, they are no longer simply a wanderer. They are a figure tied to the most important source of hope the capital wasteland has ever seen, standing at the point where history's destruction finally gave way to the possibility of rebuilding. And as clean water flows through the broken land, the wasteland remains harsh, but it is no longer completely hopeless. Once Project Purity is activated, Fallout 3's timeline doesn't end so much as it settles into a new phase. The biggest conflict may be decided, the Purifier may be running, and the Enclave may have been pushed back. But the Capital Wasteland is still the Capital Wasteland. It is still cracked highways, hollow buildings, and long stretches of silence broken by gunfire in the distance. What changes is not the landscape itself, but the meaning of survival inside it. Because now, for the first time in generations, the wasteland has something stable to build around. Clean water becomes more than just a resource. It becomes a symbol. It becomes the rare proof that the world can improve instead of only decline. For settlements like Megaton, Rivet City, and smaller camps scattered across the region, the Purifier's success means fewer people have to rely on irradiated puddles and scavenged bottles. It means less sickness. It means less desperation. And in a place where desperation is often the root of violence, even a small reduction in suffering can ripple outward in unexpected ways. The Brotherhood of Steel becomes the most visible guardian of Project Purity. Elder Lyons' chapter already had a reputation for defending people against super mutants, and now that reputation grows. The Brotherhood is positioned near the Purifier, and its soldiers become associated with the protection of clean water routes and distribution. This creates a new kind of order in the region, not a government, but a protective presence. The Brotherhood's role is complicated because they are still the Brotherhood. They still believe technology should be controlled. They still operate under military hierarchy, but in the Capital Wasteland, they are also one of the only forces that consistently stands between ordinary settlers and extinction. Even after the main conflict, Enclave remnants can still appear across the wasteland. They do not simply vanish because Raven Rock was destroyed or because the memorial was retaken. The Enclave is a military structure, and structures like that can survive through scattered units, hidden bases, and surviving commanders. In Fallout 3's post-Purity world, Enclave soldiers can still be encountered, still armed with advanced technology, still hostile. This keeps the feeling of danger alive, because even when hope exists, it is never unchallenged. For the Lone Wanderer, life after Project Purity is shaped by the fact that they have become a known figure. They are no longer just an unknown vault dweller wandering the ruins. They are someone whose actions have affected the entire region. This is reinforced by Galaxy News Radio, where Three Dogs speaks about the Lone Wanderer as a legend. In the Fallout universe, stories travel faster than people, and Three Dogs broadcasts turn the Lone Wanderer into a symbol that others can interpret however they want. Some hear the story and feel inspired. Others hear it and feel threatened. But everyone hears it. The Capital Wasteland itself remains full of side stories that give the region its identity. Fallout 3 is known for how much of its world is shaped by optional quests and small discoveries. Many of the Wasteland's most memorable moments do not come from the main questline. They come from stumbling into a ruined building and finding a holotape that tells a final message. They come from meeting a stranger with a strange problem. They come from the way Fallout 3 builds a sense of loneliness, then breaks it with sudden, bizarre life. One of the most important side locations in Fallout 3 is the town of Canterbury Commons. It looks like a quiet, almost ordinary settlement compared to places like Megaton, but it becomes the center of one of Fallout 3's most famous side stories, the battle between the Antagonizer and the Mechanist. This storyline is both humorous and strangely sincere. It shows how, In the wasteland, people can cling to costumes and comic book identities to create meaning. It also shows that even in ruin, people still crave stories. They still want heroes and villains. They still want the world to make sense, even if they have to invent that sense themselves. Another major location is Oasis, a hidden community built around an ancient tree-like being named Harold. Harold is a character who appears in earlier Fallout games, and his presence in Fallout 3 connects the timeline across generations. In Oasis, Harold has transformed into something almost mythic, rooted into the earth, spreading plant life in a wasteland that has almost no green left. Oasis is one of Fallout 3's most unusual locations because it feels like a glimpse of a future where nature might return, where the world might heal in ways people never expected. The existence of Oasis adds depth to Fallout's theme of mutation. Mutation is not always monstrous. It is not always a curse. Sometimes, it creates something strange and beautiful, something that could not have existed in the old world. Oasis feels peaceful, almost sacred, and it stands in contrast to the harshness of the capital wasteland. It suggests that healing might come in unexpected forms, not only through machines like Project Purity, but through living change. The capital wasteland also includes the settlement of Underworld, a city built inside the ruins of the Museum of History. Underworld is inhabited primarily by ghouls, and it represents a rare space where ghouls can exist without constant persecution. Underworld shows that even centuries after the war, prejudice remains one of the wasteland's most persistent forces. Many humans fear ghouls, treat them as monsters, or refuse to accept them as people. Underworld exists because ghouls needed a place to survive together, protected from both feral threats and human hatred. Underworld's existence also reinforces Fallout's theme of identity. Ghouls are still human in mind, but their appearance forces others to see them as something else. The Lone Wanderer's interactions with Underworld can highlight how the wasteland divides people into categories, often based on fear. Underworld is one of the few places where ghouls can speak freely and live without hiding, and that makes it feel like a quiet act of resistance against the wasteland's cruelty. Another major side story involves the Republic of Dave, a tiny settlement where one man has declared himself the leader of a republic. The Republic of Dave is a comedic example of how people rebuild political structures in miniature. In a world where the old government collapsed, someone can declare themselves president over a handful of people and treat it seriously. Fallout 3 often uses humor like this to show that human behavior does not disappear with civilization. People still seek authority, recognition, and legitimacy, even if the nation is only a few shacks. The Capital Wasteland's darker side stories include the existence of Paradise Falls, a settlement run by slavers. Paradise Falls is one of Fallout 3's clearest examples of how the wasteland can produce cruelty as an economy. Slavery exists because human beings have become commodities, and in a world without law, cruelty can become profitable. Paradise Falls shows that survival alone does not make people good. It can also make them ruthless, willing to treat others as tools. The Lone Wanderer's ability to engage with these side stories gives Fallout 3 much of its role-playing power. The player can choose to help settlements, protect the weak, and build hope, or they can choose selfishness, cruelty, and destruction. Fallout 3 often presents these choices in a stark way, making morality feel like something the player actively shapes rather than something the world decides for them. One of Fallout 3's most memorable optional storylines involves Tenpenny Tower and its conflict between humans and ghouls. Tenpenny Tower represents pre-war luxury preserved, while ghouls represent the harsh reality of survival and mutation. The conflict becomes a story about prejudice, fear, and whether people can truly coexist. The player's choices can lead to very different outcomes, and those outcomes reinforce Fallout's theme that solutions in the wasteland are rarely clean or perfect. Fallout 3's exploration also reveals the strange legacy of the pre-war world through locations like vaults. Each vault tells its own story, often through environmental clues, terminal logs, and the remains of experiments. Vault 106, Vault 108, and others show different kinds of Vault-Tec cruelty. Vault 108 is famous for its cloning experiment and the repeated presence of a figure named Gary. Vault 106 is filled with hallucination gas, turning the vault into a nightmare. These vaults reinforce the idea that the apocalypse was not the only horror. Some of the worst suffering was engineered intentionally, hidden behind cheerful advertisements. As the lone wanderer continues traveling, they may also encounter the ruins of the old government's power. The Capitol building, the Washington Monument, and other landmarks stand as broken symbols of a nation that once believed itself eternal. These ruins are not just scenery. They are reminders that the old world's pride did not save it. Fallout 3 uses these landmarks to create a haunting atmosphere where history itself feels like a ghost. The Lone Wanderer's personal timeline after Project Purity becomes one of wandering and decision. They can choose to stay involved with the Brotherhood, helping stabilize the region. They can choose to focus on personal goals, collecting resources, exploring ruins, and carving out their own life. They can become a hero, a villain, or something in between. Fallout 3's post-game world is designed to feel like the wasteland continues, because it does. The Purifier does not erase danger, it only changes what kind of hope is possible. And through all of it, Vault 101 remains in the background like a quiet memory. The Lone Wanderer's life began there, in a sealed world of routine and control. Leaving it changed everything. And even if the Lone Wanderer never returns, Vault 101 represents the moment when their timeline split into something larger. A child of the Vault became a figure of the wasteland. A wanderer became a symbol. And in the Capital Wasteland, symbols matter because they are often the only thing stronger than fear. As the timeline of Fallout 3 stretches forward, the most important truth is that the wasteland never truly stops. It changes slowly. It adapts. It survives. Clean water flows. Factions rise and fall. Settlements grow or collapse. And people continue living in the shadow of the old world. But somewhere in that broken land, the Lone Wanderer's footsteps remain, woven into the ruins like a quiet echo, a reminder that even in a world shaped by destruction, one person can still leave behind something lasting. Even after Project Purity is activated and clean water begins to flow, the Capital Wasteland does not become peaceful. It becomes different, but not safe. Fallout 3's timeline continues beyond the original ending through the Broken Steel chapter, which shows that the wasteland's biggest problems don't disappear just because one victory was achieved. Instead, the victory becomes the beginning of a new struggle, because power never stays still for long in a place where survival is everything. Project Purity changes the wasteland's balance immediately, because it introduces something stable into a region that has been defined by instability. Clean water becomes a resource that can support growth, trade, and long-term settlement planning, but it also becomes a resource worth fighting over. The Enclave understands that better than anyone, even after losing Raven Rock and being pushed back from the Jefferson Memorial, Enclave forces remain active, scattered across the region like embers that refuse to go out. The Brotherhood of Steel, under Elder Lyons, becomes the main defender of Project Purity's future. Lyons's chapter already had a reputation for helping wastelanders, which set them apart from more traditional Brotherhood chapters. After Project Purity, Lyons's mission becomes even more direct. It is no longer only about fighting super mutants or recovering technology. It becomes about holding the line against the Enclave and protecting the distribution of clean water across the capital wasteland. This is where the Brotherhood's internal conflict becomes sharper. Lyons's focus on defending people has already created tension with Brotherhood members who believe the chapter should return to the traditional mission of hoarding technology. That disagreement doesn't vanish during wartime. In fact, war can make disagreements worse, because every decision has consequences. Every resource used to defend settlements is a resource not used to secure technology. Every soldier sent to escort water caravans is a soldier not sent to hunt artifacts. The Brotherhood's identity is being tested at the same time as its strength. One of the most important long-term developments is the creation of the Brotherhood Outcasts. The Outcasts are Brotherhood soldiers who broke away from Lyons's leadership because they believed he abandoned the Brotherhood's true purpose. They see Lyons as weak, too willing to help outsiders, too distracted by charity. The Outcasts represent a harsher version of the Brotherhood, one that believes technology must be gathered and controlled above all else. Their existence shows that even a powerful faction can fracture when ideology becomes more important than unity. While the Brotherhood struggles internally, the Enclave continues pushing forward. The Enclave's leadership has been shaken, but their military discipline remains. Enclave soldiers still have advanced power armor, plasma weapons, and access to vertibirds. They are still one of the most technologically powerful forces in the region, and their goal remains the same: reclaim the wasteland and control its future. The Enclave does not accept defeat easily because their identity is built on the belief that they are America's rightful heirs. In Broken Steel's timeline, the Enclave begins launching attacks against Brotherhood positions and civilian targets. Their presence becomes more aggressive, more visible. Enclave patrols roam the wasteland, and battles break out in the ruins. This creates a new feeling in the capital wasteland, where the quiet emptiness of earlier exploration is replaced by the sense that a real war is happening in the background. The lone wanderer, now more experienced and more capable, becomes central to this ongoing conflict. They are no longer just surviving. They are being used as a weapon by the Brotherhood, sent into dangerous territory to complete missions that normal soldiers may not survive. The lone wanderer's role shifts into something closer to a special operative, someone who can infiltrate, sabotage, and fight in places where organized forces struggle. One of the most important threats during this stage is the Enclave's use of mobile bases and strongholds. The Enclave's ability to appear in different locations makes them difficult to eliminate completely. They are not a raider gang that collapses when its leader dies. They are a structured military organization. Even if one base is destroyed, others can remain. This is what makes them so dangerous. They can lose battles and still keep fighting. The Brotherhood responds by expanding its operations across the wasteland. Patrols increase, defensive positions are reinforced, and the Brotherhood's ultimate symbol of power, Liberty Prime, becomes even more important. Liberty Prime is not simply a weapon. It is a statement that the Brotherhood has something the Enclave fears: a machine that can walk through defenses and crush armies in the open streets. Liberty Prime's existence changes how the war feels. The Enclave is powerful, but Liberty Prime is overwhelming. Its presence turns battles into spectacles. where the wasteland's ruins become a stage for a war between forces that feel almost too large for the broken world they're fighting in. Liberty Prime also reinforces the theme that the old world's technology still defines the new world's conflicts. The war is being fought with weapons created before the bombs fell, repurposed for a future no one planned. As the conflict escalates, the lone wanderer becomes involved in missions that reveal more of the Enclave's methods. The Enclave's strategy is not only to fight the Brotherhood directly, but to weaken the Wasteland's hope. They attack water caravans. They strike settlements. They attempt to disrupt the distribution of clean water, because if Project Purity becomes stable, the Brotherhood gains legitimacy and the Wasteland becomes less desperate. The Enclave needs desperation. It needs chaos. It needs people to believe they have no choice but to accept Enclave authority. The Purifier itself becomes the heart of this conflict, not just because it provides water, but because it represents a future the Enclave cannot control. The Enclave's ideology is built around purity and ownership. They believe the wasteland must be cleansed and ruled. A purifier that belongs to everyone contradicts that ideology. It proves that people can build hope without needing the Enclave. And that is why the Enclave continues fighting, even after suffering major losses. One of the most significant developments in Broken Steel's timeline is the final effort to crush the Enclave's remaining power. The Brotherhood realizes that as long as the Enclave continues operating, the capital wasteland will never stabilize. The Enclave will keep attacking, keep spreading fear, and keep attempting to reclaim control. The Brotherhood needs a decisive victory, something that ends the war rather than simply pushing it into the background. This leads to the assault on Adams Air Force Base, one of the Enclave's major remaining strongholds. Adams Air Force Base represents the Enclave's ability to hold onto pre-war military infrastructure. It is a location where the Enclave can launch vertibirds, maintain supplies, and operate as a true military force. Taking it is not just a tactical victory, it is symbolic. It is the destruction of the Enclave's last major foothold in the region. The journey toward Adams Air Force Base is dangerous because the Enclave knows what is at stake. Their defenses are heavy. Their soldiers are prepared. The lone wanderer and the Brotherhood face advanced weaponry, strong fortifications, and the reality that the Enclave will fight to the last. The assault becomes one of the most intense conflicts in Fallout 3's timeline because it is not a small battle in a ruined street. It is a direct strike against the heart of an organized enemy. Liberty Prime once again becomes central in this assault. The robot's presence allows the Brotherhood to push through defenses that would otherwise be impossible. Liberty Prime's size and firepower make it the Brotherhood's greatest advantage. It is the embodiment of brute force, used to break a faction that relies on technology and control. In a strange way, the war becomes a contest between two visions of the old world: the Enclave's vision of government authority and purity, and the Brotherhood's vision of controlled technology used for protection. The destruction of Enclave power at Adams Air Force Base marks a turning point in the capital wasteland's future. It does not erase every Enclave soldier instantly, but it breaks their ability to function as a large-scale force. Without major bases, without leadership, and without infrastructure, the Enclave becomes scattered and weakened. The Brotherhood gains the upper hand, and the wasteland gains a chance to breathe. This new balance changes how the capital wasteland feels. The Purifier continues operating. Water caravans become more reliable. Settlements have more stability. The Brotherhood's presence becomes more normal, more integrated into the region's daily life. The war fades from constant crisis into something more distant, though the wasteland never becomes truly peaceful. Raiders still exist. Super mutants still roam, The ruins still hide danger, but the sense of hopelessness becomes less absolute. Broken Steel's timeline also reinforces Fallout 3's core theme that the wasteland is shaped by long struggles, not single victories. Project Purity was a massive achievement, but it did not instantly rebuild civilization. It created a foundation, and foundations still need protection, maintenance, and time. The Lone Wanderer's story becomes one of continuing responsibility because in the wasteland, hope is not something you win once. It is something you have to defend again and again. As the capital wasteland moves forward, it becomes a region defined by this fragile new stability. Clean water flows, the Brotherhood stands guard, the Enclave fades into scattered remnants, and the Lone Wanderer remains a figure at the center of it all, someone who stepped out of Vault 101 as a confused survivor and became a force strong enough to reshape the fate of an entire wasteland. After the Enclave's power is broken and the biggest battles fade into memory, the capital wasteland enters a strange kind of calm. Not the calm of safety, and not the calm of comfort, but the calm of exhaustion. The region has been fighting for so long that even survival begins to feel routine again. Clean water continues to flow from Project Purity. The Brotherhood patrols the roads and ruins. Settlements keep their gates closed at night, and the wasteland settles back into what it has always been, a place where life continues even when the world has no reason to support it. In this stage of the timeline, the Lone Wanderer becomes less like a soldier in a war and more like what their name always suggested, a wanderer. The big missions may be complete, but the capital wasteland still stretches out endlessly, full of places that don't care about the main story. There are abandoned towns that no one remembers. There are buildings that were never important, but still contain someone's final moments. There are tunnels that lead nowhere except deeper into darkness. Fallout 3's world becomes most powerful when it slows down, when it lets the player drift from location to location, discovering the wasteland the way a traveler would, not as a hero, but as someone simply passing through. The wasteland's quiet corners are often where the most haunting stories are found. Fallout 3 is filled with environmental storytelling, where the world itself tells you what happened. A collapsed room with skeletons can suggest a family's final attempt to hide. A terminal log can reveal a pre-war worker's panic as the bombs fell. A holotape can capture a voice that hasn't been heard in centuries. These details are small, but they add up, and they create the feeling that the wasteland is not empty. It is full of echoes. One of the strongest examples of this is how Fallout 3 treats the ruins of Washington, D.C. The monuments and government buildings still stand in broken form, and their presence gives the wasteland a strange sense of history. The Capitol building, the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, these were symbols of power and permanence, built to represent the nation's pride. Now they sit in a landscape of rubble and radiation. The contrast is one of Fallout's most important themes, because it shows that even the greatest symbols of civilization can become nothing more than landmarks for scavengers. The Lincoln Memorial, in particular, becomes a place where Fallout 3 explores what it means to rebuild identity. The memorial is connected to the story of the Temple of the Union and the idea of freed slaves searching for safety. In a wasteland where slavery can still exist, where people can still be bought and sold, the Lincoln Memorial becomes a reminder of an older struggle for freedom. Fallout 3 uses the memorial's symbolism to show that history repeats, not because people forget it, but because survival can drag society backward when there is no law to stop it. Beyond the ruins, the capital wasteland is filled with small settlements that survive in ways that feel almost fragile. Some are built around scrap walls, like Megaton. Others are built into existing structures, like Underworld. Some are nothing more than a handful of shacks with a name. Each settlement has its own culture, its own fears, and its own rules. And what makes Fallout 3 feel real is that many of these settlements do not exist to serve the main quest. They exist because the world would feel empty without them. The wasteland's traveling merchants and caravans become more important in this calmer phase because trade is what keeps settlements alive. Caps still move through hands, ammo still gets sold, food still gets bartered, and now, clean water becomes part of that economy. In Fallout 3, purified water is not just a healing item, it is a symbol of stability, and it becomes one of the most valuable trade goods in the region. The fact that clean water can now be distributed changes the economy, even if slowly, because it gives people something reliable to build trade routes around. The Brotherhood's patrols create a subtle sense of order in this phase. Even if the Brotherhood is not a government, their presence reduces the feeling that the roads are completely lawless. They still fight super mutants. They still eliminate threats. They still defend Project Purity's infrastructure. But they also become a reminder that power always has a cost. The Brotherhood is not simply a charity force. They are a military faction, and their influence shapes the wasteland's future in ways that are not always visible immediately. At the same time, the Brotherhood outcasts remain a reminder that ideology can divide even those who share the same armor. The outcasts are still Brotherhood soldiers, but their priorities are different. They value technology above people. They see the wasteland as something to control, not to heal. Their existence suggests that even if the capital wasteland stabilizes, it could still face future conflicts between factions that disagree on what rebuilding should look like. One of the most unsettling parts of Fallout 3's timeline, even in calmer times, is the continued existence of the Vaults. Vault-Tech's experiments did not end when the war ended. They left scars that last centuries. Vaults are like time capsules of suffering, sealed environments where human lives were turned into data points. In Fallout 3, exploring vaults often feels like stepping into a horror story because the vaults are not ruined in the same way as surface buildings. They are enclosed, tight, and filled with the remains of people who never escaped. Vault 108 is one of the most famous examples. It is known for its cloning experiment and the repeated presence of the name Gary. The vault's halls are filled with clones, and the repetition of the same identity becomes both eerie and strangely comedic. But beneath the humor is something darker. Vault 108 shows what happens when a system is designed to break down, when humans are treated like test subjects rather than people. It is a vault that never had a chance to become a stable home. Vault 106 is another example of Vault-Tech cruelty. It was designed to release psychoactive gas into the vault, causing hallucinations and mental collapse. Exploring Vault 106 is unsettling because it turns the vault into a place where reality itself feels unstable. The environment becomes distorted, and the player experiences visions of the vault's past. This vault shows that Vault-Tech's experiments were not always about long-term survival. Sometimes they were about breaking minds, simply to see what would happen. Vault 92 is tied to sound experiments, where residents were exposed to audio signals designed to manipulate behavior. It shows how Vault-Tech used even art and music as tools for control. The Vault story is a reminder that pre-war society's obsession with control extended into every corner of life. Even the idea of culture, something meant to inspire and comfort, could be twisted into a weapon. These Vault stories are part of what makes Fallout 3's timeline feel heavy. The war was catastrophic, but the Vaults show that the world was already broken in quieter ways before the bombs fell. The apocalypse did not create cruelty, it revealed it. Vault-Tec simply gave it a new shape and buried it underground. Beyond the vaults, Fallout 3's quiet corners include places like the Dunwich Building, one of the most unsettling locations in the game. The Dunwich Building is a ruined office structure filled with raiders, but it also carries something stranger. Its atmosphere is darker than normal, and it hints at supernatural or cosmic horror elements. Fallout 3 rarely leans into outright supernatural explanations, but the Dunwich Building suggests that the world contains mysteries beyond radiation and war, things that feel older and less explainable. Fallout 3 also includes places that feel almost absurd, reminding the player that humor survives even in ruin. The Republic of Dave is one example, where a tiny settlement pretends to be a nation. The Mechanist and Antagonizer storyline is another, where comic book identities become real roles. These stories provide relief, but they also make a point. Even after everything collapses, people still crave identity, drama, and meaning. They still create roles for themselves because living without a story is too empty. In the calmer phase of the timeline, the lone wanderer's life becomes defined by these smaller stories. They may travel to help someone trapped by raiders. They may choose to free slaves or profit from their suffering. They may choose to repair relationships between communities or destroy them for personal gain. Fallout 3's world remains open to the player's morality, and that morality shapes what the wasteland becomes in their version of the timeline. What makes this part of the Fallout 3 timeline feel different from the war phase is that it is quieter, but not less important. The war against the Enclave decided who would control the Purifier, but the small decisions decide what kind of wasteland grows around it. Clean water can exist, but it can still be stolen. Settlements can grow, but they can still be raided. The Brotherhood can patrol, but they can't be everywhere. The wasteland's future is built on countless small actions, not just one heroic moment. As the timeline continues forward, the Capital Wasteland remains a place of contradictions. It is devastated, but alive. It is dangerous, but full of people trying to build routines. It is haunted by the past, but still capable of producing new stories. And somewhere within it, the lone wanderer continues walking, not always as a hero, not always as a villain, but as a traveler shaped by the vault, the war, and the quiet knowledge that the wasteland never truly ends. It simply changes, one slow, uncertain day at a time. As the Capital Wasteland settles into its uneasy rhythm after Project Purity and the war against the Enclave, Fallout 3's timeline begins to feel less like a single story and more like a chain of consequences. The lone wanderer's journey started in a vault that was designed to stay closed forever, and it ended with the activation of a machine that could reshape an entire region. But the most interesting part of Fallout 3's timeline is not only what happened, it's what those events meant to the world that survived them. Vault 101 was meant to be a controlled society, sealed away from the wasteland, protected from danger, and isolated from change. It was a place where rules replaced uncertainty. The Overseer's authority was built on fear of the outside, and for most residents, that fear worked. It kept them obedient, predictable, and contained. But Vault 101 also shows one of Fallout's most consistent truths. You can't seal away curiosity forever. You can lock doors, control information, and punish disobedience, but you can't stop people from wondering what's beyond the walls. The lone wanderer's birth and childhood inside Vault 101 are the beginning of Fallout 3's timeline in a very personal way. They grow up surrounded by routines, school lessons, and a community that feels small but familiar. Their life is shaped by the Vault's culture by the way people speak about the outside as if it is a myth. Even their friendships and conflicts are shaped by the vault's confinement, because in a sealed world, every relationship matters more. There are no strangers. Everyone is someone you will see every day for the rest of your life. James's presence in Vault 101 is what makes the story possible. He enters the vault with his infant child, and the vault allows it because he is useful. That detail matters because it shows that even Vault 101, strict as it is, can bend when it needs to. The vault may claim it never opens, but it opened for James. And that single exception becomes the crack that eventually breaks the vault's certainty apart. When James leaves Vault 101, he doesn't just abandon the vault. He abandons the illusion that safety is enough. He returns to Project Purity, a dream he once shared with Catherine and a group of scientists who believed the capital wasteland could be healed. James's decision is shaped by grief, hope, and responsibility. He could have stayed in Vault 101 and lived quietly, raising his child in isolation, but he couldn't let the purifier die forever. In the end, his purpose was stronger than his fear. The Lone Wanderer leaving Vault 101 is one of the most important moments in the timeline because it represents a birth into reality. The wasteland is harsh, but it is real. The Lone Wanderer's first steps outside are filled with shock, danger, and confusion. They encounter raiders, mutated creatures, ruined buildings, and the feeling of endless open space. But they also encounter something the vault could never offer: choice. The wasteland may be cruel, but it allows freedom, and freedom becomes the foundation of the Lone Wanderer's identity. Megaton becomes the first major symbol of that freedom. It is a town built around an unexploded bomb, a settlement that should not exist but does anyway. Megaton shows that people can build community out of scrap, that survival can become routine, and that the wasteland is full of contradictions. It is also where the Lone Wanderer is introduced to the idea that morality in the wasteland is not enforced by law. It is enforced only by the choices people make. Whether Megaton lives or dies can depend on the player's decision, and that fact sets the tone for the rest of Fallout 3's timeline. From Megaton, the Lone Wanderer's search leads toward Galaxy News Radio and Three Dog, a figure who turns the wasteland into a connected community through voice and story. Three Dog is important because he represents the power of information. In a world where people are isolated, rumors and broadcasts become lifelines. Three Dog doesn't just entertain, he shapes reputation. He turns the Lone Wanderer into a legend, and in doing so, he changes how the wasteland sees them. The Lone Wanderer becomes more than a traveler. They become a symbol, whether they want it or not. The journey through the ruins of Washington, D.C. is another major turning point. The city's broken streets and metro tunnels introduce the Lone Wanderer to the wasteland's most intense danger zones. Super mutants roam the ruins like predators, and their presence creates the feeling that the city is occupied by something inhuman and unstoppable. The Lone Wanderer learns to survive in this environment, moving through darkness and debris, fighting enemies stronger than anything the vault could have prepared them for. Rivet City shifts the tone again because it shows a different kind of survival. It is a structured community with scientists, doctors, security, and a sense of long-term planning. Rivet City becomes the place where the Lone Wanderer's personal mission connects fully to the larger timeline. It is where Dr. Madison Lee reveals the truth about Project Purity and James's history. It is where the Lone Wanderer learns that their father is not simply running away, he is returning to something that could change the world. Project Purity becomes the heart of Fallout 3's timeline because it represents the rare idea of progress. Most of the wasteland is defined by decay. Buildings collapse, people die, settlements rise and fall. But Project Purity is about building something new, something that creates rather than destroys. Clean water is one of the most valuable resources in the wasteland, and the purifier represents a future where survival is less desperate. It represents a world where people can grow instead of simply endure. The Jefferson Memorial becomes the stage for tragedy and conflict. When James is reunited with the lone wanderer, the moment is brief because the Enclave arrives and turns the purifier into a battlefield. James's sacrifice is one of the most defining moments of the timeline because it transforms the story from a search into a mission. James dies not only to protect his dream, but to protect the wasteland from the Enclave's control. His death is a final refusal to let clean water become a weapon. The Enclave's role in the timeline is central because they represent the old world's authority returning in its most extreme form. They claim to be the United States government's rightful continuation. They wear power armor. They have advanced weapons. They speak in the language of patriotism and purity, but their vision of restoration is not about helping everyone. It is about control, cleansing, and dominance. The Enclave sees the wasteland as contaminated, and it sees itself as the only force worthy of ruling what remains. Raven Rock reveals the truth behind that authority. President Eden, the voice of the Enclave, is an artificial intelligence, a machine wearing the mask of the presidency. This detail matters because it shows how the old world symbols can be used even when the old world is dead. Eden's plan to use modified FEV through Project Purity reveals the Enclave's deepest cruelty. It would not save the wasteland. It would erase it, killing countless lives in the name of purity. The final conflict brings Liberty Prime into the timeline as a symbol of overwhelming force. The Brotherhood of Steel, under Elder Lyons, becomes the main opposition to the Enclave. Lyons's chapter is different from traditional Brotherhood ideology because it chooses to protect people, even at the cost of internal unity. Liberty Prime, a pre-war war machine, becomes the tool that allows the Brotherhood to break Enclave defenses and retake the Purifier. The battle for the Jefferson Memorial becomes the war's climax, where the Purifier is finally activated and clean water begins flowing. Broken Steel extends the timeline by showing that victory does not end conflict. The Enclave continues fighting, launching attacks, and refusing to fade quietly. The Brotherhood pushes back, and the Lone Wanderer continues operating as the region's most important agent. The assault on Adams Air Force Base becomes the final strike that breaks Enclave infrastructure and ends their ability to function as a major military force. The Capital Wasteland gains a fragile new balance, where clean water exists and hope becomes possible, but danger remains. After the war, Fallout 3's timeline becomes quieter, but no less meaningful. The Wasteland's side stories, settlements, vaults, and strange communities define daily life. Underworld becomes a haven for ghouls. Oasis becomes a strange pocket of green life. Canterbury Commons becomes a stage for comic book identities turned real. Paradise Falls remains a reminder that cruelty can become an economy. These stories show that the wasteland is not only a battlefield, it is a living place full of human behavior in all its forms, from kindness to horror to absurdity. And through all of it, the Lone Wanderer's legacy becomes the thread that ties the timeline together. They are the child who left the vault and survived. They are the wanderer who became a legend through Three Dogs broadcasts. They are the one who carried the Gek, faced Eden's offer, and stood in the Purifier chamber where James died. Their actions decide whether the Purifier becomes life or death. Their choices shape how the capital wasteland remembers them. Fallout 3's timeline, when seen as a whole, is a story about inheritance. The lone wanderer inherits James's dream, Catherine's hope, Vault 101's isolation, and the wasteland's cruelty. They inherit a world that is broken and a future that is uncertain, but they also inherit the rare ability to change something. In a wasteland defined by ruin, the lone wanderer proves that one person can still matter. And as the capital wasteland stretches forward into the years beyond Fallout 3, the future remains open. Clean water flows. The Brotherhood stands guard. Settlements continue building their fragile lives. The ruins still loom over everything like ghosts. But somewhere in the broken land, the echo of the lone wanderer remains, not as a perfect hero and not as a flawless savior, but as the quiet proof that even after the end of the world, the story can still move forward. As Fallout 3's timeline reaches its furthest point, the capital wasteland begins to feel like a place caught between two futures. One future is the old one, the world of ruins and radiation, where survival is the only rule and every day is a coin toss. The other future is something new and uncertain, built on clean water, guarded roads, and the possibility that people might finally stop living like the apocalypse happened yesterday. Fallout 3 does not claim that the wasteland becomes peaceful because that would be dishonest, but it does suggest something quieter and more realistic, that the wasteland can change slowly, one small improvement at a time, and that those improvements matter even if they don't look dramatic. Project Purity becomes the most important symbol in the region, not because it is perfect, but because it is stable. Clean water is a foundation that every settlement can build on. It reduces disease. It reduces desperation. It makes trade more reliable. It gives communities a reason to think long-term instead of only surviving the next night. In the wasteland, long-term thinking is rare because the world punishes it. Raiders can destroy plans in minutes. Super mutants can wipe out a caravan in an afternoon. But clean water changes the equation. It doesn't remove danger, but it makes planning possible. As water spreads outward, settlements begin to feel the shift in small ways. People who once depended on irradiated puddles and scavenged bottles now have a chance at something safer. That safety might be limited, and it might not reach everyone equally, but it exists. In Fallout 3's world, even a small increase in safety is a major victory because the baseline is so harsh. The Purifier does not rebuild the world, but it gives the world a reason to keep trying. The Brotherhood of Steel's role in this new era becomes one of the biggest questions. Elder Lyons' chapter is tied to Project Purity so strongly that the Purifier's future is almost inseparable from the Brotherhood's future. The Brotherhood provides security, patrols, and a deterrent against organized threats. Their presence keeps the Enclave from rising again in the same way. It also reduces the pressure from super mutants, because Brotherhood squads actively fight them. This protection makes the wasteland feel less hopeless. But the Brotherhood's presence also introduces a new kind of power into the region. The Brotherhood is not elected. It is not accountable in the way a government would be. It operates under its own rules and ideology. Even if Lyons' chapter is more compassionate than others, it is still a military faction with control over advanced technology. Fallout 3 leaves open the question of what happens when the Brotherhood becomes the most powerful force in the region. The Wasteland's future depends not only on what the Brotherhood can do, but on what it chooses to become. The Brotherhood outcasts remain a reminder that Lyons' version of the Brotherhood is not the only possible path. The outcasts believe technology should be prioritized above protecting outsiders. They represent the more traditional Brotherhood ideology, and their existence suggests that even if the capital wasteland stabilizes, it could still face internal conflicts within its strongest faction. If Lyons' leadership ever weakens, or if the Brotherhood's values shift, the wasteland could find itself under a different kind of protection, one that feels colder and less human. Meanwhile, the Enclave's fall does not erase its impact. Even if its bases are destroyed and its forces scattered, the Enclave leaves behind a legacy of fear and trauma. The Enclave proved that organized, pre-war military power could still return, and that it could threaten to reshape the wasteland completely. Survivors who lived through Enclave attacks will remember that. Settlements that saw vertibirds overhead will remember that. The wasteland's sense of security will always carry the memory that something worse can rise again. This is one of Fallout 3's strongest themes. The apocalypse is not a single event, it is a condition. The Great War happened in 2077, but the world keeps ending in smaller ways afterward. People lose homes, settlements collapse, new threats emerge. The wasteland is a place where endings repeat, and the only way to survive is to keep moving forward anyway. The Lone Wanderer's personal legacy becomes part of this repeating cycle. They began as a child in Vault 101, raised under rules meant to last forever. Their life was controlled, predictable, and small. Then everything changed, not because they chose adventure, but because circumstances forced them out. James left, the Overseer reacted with violence, and the Lone Wanderer had to escape. Their story is shaped by the fact that they didn't set out to be a hero. They were pushed into the wasteland and had to adapt. This makes the Lone Wanderer's journey feel different from other Fallout protagonists. The Vault Dweller of Fallout 1 was sent out with a mission to save their vault. The Chosen One of Fallout 2 was sent out to save their tribe. The Lone Wanderer leaves because they are trying to find their father, and because the vault becomes unsafe. Their mission begins personal, not heroic. But it becomes heroic because the wasteland is too interconnected for personal stories to remain small. James's influence on the timeline is one of the most tragic and meaningful threads. James represents the idea of hope through science, and he represents the cost of holding onto that hope. He lost Catherine, he abandoned the Purifier, he hid in Vault 101, and then he returned. His final act was not a victory, it was a sacrifice. He chose to die rather than allow the Enclave to take control of the Purifier. That sacrifice becomes the moment when the Lone Wanderer's story changes permanently because it turns their mission into a legacy. The Purifier itself becomes a monument to that legacy. Not a stone monument like the Lincoln Memorial, but a living one, a machine that changes lives every day it runs. Every bottle of clean water taken from the Purifier's distribution is part of James's dream becoming real. Every settlement that survives a drought because purified water exists is part of that dream. The Purifier's existence makes James's death meaningful in a way the wasteland rarely allows. It proves that sacrifice can sometimes create something lasting. Fallout 3's side stories deepen this meaning by showing how the wasteland responds to hope. Not everyone responds with gratitude. Some respond with greed. Some respond with fear. Some respond with violence. The wasteland is full of people who have adapted to suffering so deeply that they don't trust improvement. When clean water appears, some see it as a miracle. Others see it as something to exploit. Fallout 3 suggests that rebuilding is not only about creating resources, it is about changing minds that have been shaped by centuries of survival trauma. The vaults remain the darkest reminder of the old world's cruelty. Even as the wasteland tries to move forward, the vaults sit underground like scars that never heal. They are proof that the pre-war world did not collapse purely because of external pressure. It collapsed because of the choices it made, because of its obsession with control, power, and experimentation. Vault-Tec promised safety, but it delivered suffering disguised as shelter. Exploring vaults in Fallout 3 reinforces the idea that the apocalypse began long before the bombs fell, in the way people treated each other when they still had everything. The ruins of Washington, D.C. serve as the wasteland's most constant reminder of what was lost. The monuments and buildings stand broken but recognizable, like ghosts that refuse to fade. They give the wasteland a sense of identity, because even in ruin, the capital still feels like the center of something. The old world's symbols still dominate the skyline, even if the old world's power is gone. This creates one of Fallout 3's most haunting feelings. The past is everywhere, and it will never fully disappear. And yet, the wasteland is not only haunted, it is alive. People build towns from scrap. They trade, argue, and celebrate small victories. They tell stories. They create new traditions. They fall in love. They betray each other. They protect their families, and they do terrible things for survival. Fallout 3's world feels real because it shows that humanity continues in all its forms, even after the world ends. By the time the timeline reaches its quiet conclusion, the Capital Wasteland feels like a place that has been nudged toward the future, not thrown into it. Clean water flows, but danger remains. The Brotherhood stands guard, but power remains complicated. Settlements survive, but the ruins still loom. The lone wanderer's story becomes part of the wasteland's mythology, carried by Three Dogs broadcasts and by the way people speak about the Purifier. And in the end, Fallout 3 leaves behind a story that is less about winning and more about enduring. It is about the fact that the world can be broken beyond recognition and still contain people who try to fix it. It is about the fact that hope can exist even when it feels unreasonable. And it is about the fact that sometimes the most important thing a person can do in the wasteland is not to conquer it, but to leave it slightly better than they found it, so that someone else, somewhere down the road, has a little less darkness to walk through.